And we are back for more coverage of 2019 Historicon. Okay, I'm here with my friend Adam. Okay, and we are going to talk about some jungle action. We've had a lot of requests for jungle action. Jungle combat and jungle terrain is the theme for this year's Historicon. So how about you tell us a little bit about what your, first of all, amazing table here, and tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Well, thank you for the table compliment. This is the battle fought in 1941, December. It's in the jungles of Luzon in the Philippines. We've got the U.S. Army's 192nd Tank Battalion versus the 4th Japanese Imperial Armor. And here we've got they are armed and equipped with the Japanese light tank, the Ha-Go, which you mentioned earlier. And of course the U.S. have the M3 light tank. Eventually be called the Stuart, but right now it's just known as the M3 light tank.
Okay, so people on our site who might be familiar with some of our previous boot camps are going to be somewhat familiar with the M3. The M3 is sometimes the British would call it the Honey. So you guys have probably seen a little bit about that before. What might be a little less familiar are the Ha-Go. So how are the Ha-Gos actually armed?
Well, they have a 37 millimeter gun that's fairly comparable to the American, just a little bit less. However, it's only got a one-man turret. So that guy is commander, he's the gunner, he's the loader, and he has a machine gun in the back. And the actual turret is not motorized. He actually turns it with his shoulders. However, it's one of the few tanks where you can actually wiggle the gun or move it back and forth without actually rotating the turret. The other guy, there's a driver and a machine gunner in the hull as well. So it's a 3-man tank. It's very fast, but its armor is very poor. It's debatable whether it's actually armed as well as the M3 half-track. So in some cases, actually in this battle, the lead U.S. tank, as it was coming in, they did a test fire. They never shot it out, shot 37 in the Stuart or in the M3 before, and when he fired, the gun locked in the back position and he couldn't get it to function. So he went into battle with machine guns only, and he was able to knock out the Japanese tanks. The only problem with this is that there's really good records of what happened to the U.S. unit, not much so as what happened to the Japanese, but we do know that it stopped the Japanese advance. Now, it was only 5 tanks involved in the first gamble, so it was 5 U.S. tanks versus basically a full company of Japanese tanks. Okay, so here's just a little bit of broad background information. Okay, Pearl Harbor has basically just happened. Okay. Well, actually, it's several weeks now.
Okay, so Pearl Harbor has happened recently. Okay, and what's happened was the whole point of Pearl Harbor was to smash the American fleet in the Pacific, so that the American fleet would not be able to respond to a whole spectrum of Japanese invasions across the Pacific. One of them is here in the Philippines.
That's correct, yes, absolutely. Just prior to this, I don't know if you knew it, but the actual U.S. had more troops, twice as many infantry and more aircraft than the Japanese. However, just like in Pearl Harbor, after Pearl Harbor was over, for some reason the general ordered all the aircraft to be parked in the middle of the airfield so they could be guarded rather than in their replacements where they're supposed to be. And so the Japanese flew over and blew up the entire Air Force. As far as the fight that fought all the way down through the Battle of Luzon, it's baffling as to why we lost. We had more artillery, more guys, more everything, and we still lost the battle. So it's a little bit of an embarrassment when you look and you read that about U.S. history. The Japanese, with their low-grade tanks and their weapons, were able to fight basically twice the amount of men all the way down the island, drive everybody to the Bataan Peninsula, and then off to the Corregidor.
I would say probably the only real advantage the Japanese might have had, and even this is a little debatable depending on exactly what units, the Japanese did have a certain degree of combat experience from their fighting in China.
Yes, except for these aren't, that the units in China are still there, so they're not even the same guys. No, it was basically a failure in command structure on the U.S. side. You had a lot of low-level officers that wanted to do things and actually accomplish them, but time and time again, like in this particular reason, the reason why there's only 5 tanks in this first battle is because the fuel was not delivered to the battalion, so they could only fuel 5 tanks to take them into combat. So it was an entire logistics and command structure that led basically to a disaster here in the Philippines.
So sometimes people on the site will ask us why Japanese tanks were so terrible in World War II. From what I'm understanding, Japanese Army doctrine looking forward out of the 1930s into the 1940s was anticipating a long ground war in China. And China didn't have any tanks. So they didn't see tanks as a huge priority. Is that more or less what you...
there's that, but you also got to remember that their tanks, if you compare them with other 1930s tanks, the Japanese tanks are very comparable. I mean, if you take the Ha-Go and you match it up with the Mark I Panzer and the Mark II Panzer, which is built at the same time, it's a good tank. It's also, if you compare their medium tanks to, say, the T-26 Russian tank, it's still comparable type of tanks. The issue came down to is they just didn't have the supplies to really continue building more and more tanks. And, of course, they were going from islands, so you have to have a small tank so you can put it on a ship, and then you can put it on a landing craft and land it. It's the same problem we had with the Sherman. You couldn't make a big tank. The Sherman was just the right size to fit through the railroad tunnels, to fit on the railroad tracks, to fit on the landing craft. Japanese did the same thing.
Okay. So I think that's going to wrap us up for now, guys. This table looks amazing. We're going to check back later to see it in action. Okay, we're going to go ahead and, we're going to go sign off for now. Continue to watch us and comment throughout the rest of the day and into the weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.